On Unit 4, we'll be talking about the property market and when exactly is the best time to trade property. So guys, we've already covered a ton of information. We've covered what the different property types are and what sort of different claddings you can come across, as well as what the titles actually mean for different property titles as well. And we've also covered the major do's and don'ts when it comes to buying property and what makes a property more attractive than another property to certain buyers. Right, and we've covered the sales and purchase both privately and through auction as well, and we've covered it enough in detail so that you can actually start going out and putting offers on properties with that conditional clause as well. Now, what we're going to be talking about next is the property market, where we are we now, and how it actually affects us. And before we actually talk about where we are in the property market, we have to have a quick recap session. So if you remember on the webinar, if you managed to watch the webinar, I actually talked about what is a buyer's market and what's a seller's market. So just to recap, let's talk about the buyer's market first. So on the left hand side, we can see a graph here, and the left hand side is basically the price, on the bottom is the quantity. So we can see that basically the more quantity of housing, the less the price is going to be, right? And that's quite logical because the higher supply of houses means, well, if there's more housing available, people are going to pay less for it because there's so much stock available on the market, as opposed to the seller's market, which you can see on graph number 2 on the right hand side there, that if there's less quantity of housing available but the demand's quite high, well, guess what? Everyone's actually going to be competing for that same stock, and that's actually what's going to push the price up. Now, it's not as simple as just the quantity of housing available on the open market. We also have to factor in, there's many different variables, but one big variable is the finance, right? So how easy is it actually to get finance to go out and purchase housing? Now, where we're at the moment is finance is a little bit more difficult to get than a few years ago, where the deposits wasn't as high as required from purchasers, as well as the banks were a lot lenient. They weren't making people jump through a lot more loopholes, etc. Right? So with finance being a little bit more difficult, what that means is the demand for property has essentially dropped. Although the real life demand of people, they're still wanting to buy property, but the situation or the outcome, the results that the banks have had by making finance more difficult to obtain, means that people physically can't go out and buy property because they don't have the finance to do so. So that typically means the demand is not there, and the stock that's available will slowly increase because the sellers are still wanting to sell, but no one's prepared to buy it, right? So if the sellers are prepared to sell it, but no one's prepared to buy it, well, guess what? It turns into a buyer's market. It turns into what we have on graph 1, where there's more and more property available, but less and less people being able to actually go out and buy it. And it's not because that they don't want to buy it, it's simply because they can't obtain the finance to go out and buy it. And that can be the same for a seller's market. If, again, it doesn't really matter on the amount of quantity of home, because if there's a ton of finance available and it's very easy to get for everyone, well, guess what? Everyone's going to be going out there and gathering finance and going out and buying a lot of property, which shoots the prices up. And sellers can't keep up with all the demand, and there might not be enough stock. And that's what will lead to a real lack of stock because of the ease of finance, that everyone's going out and obtaining finance and pushing the prices up, that eventually the stock will kind of dwindle down and slow down as well. So those are the two main differences between a buyer's market and a seller's market, and hopefully that gives you an understanding of why we're actually in a buyer's market. So we've established that we're in a buyer's market, but how does this actually affect me when it comes to buying property? So I've actually got 2 images here displayed. So in a buyer's market, it's actually easy to buy property at a low price. Now, versus a seller's market, it's actually hard to buy at a low price. And that's pretty easy to establish why, because on a buyer's market there's so much stock available and no competition to buy the properties that, well, you can go in and actually offer a low price and the vendor would actually accept it. Now on the other spectrum, you can see the diagram here, or the image here, sorry, rather, that there's one house available but there's a ton of people looking at that property. Everyone's got finance and ready to go. Well, guess what? It's going to be pretty difficult in a seller's market for you to actually buy at a low price because there's so many people competing against with you. So it's very straightforward, and I hope that makes sense. Equally, we want to find out how this actually affects us when it comes time to selling. So In a seller's market, it's easy to sell at a high price versus in a current buyer's market, it takes a little longer to sell at a high price. And the difference there is pretty straightforward as well. So you can see on the left diagram there's one house up for sale. It's a sales market. There's a ton of people ready to buy. They've all got finance. So of course, they're going to be competing against each other to push that price higher. Now, a buyer's market on the right-hand side, you can see that, yeah, we've picked up for a cheap price as well, but equally, it takes a little longer to sell at a high price because there's not many buyers. So it doesn't matter if there's not a whole bunch of buyers like on the left diagram, because ultimately, we are only after that one buyer that will make all the difference. But just to note, on a buyer's market, it takes a little longer to sell, and on a seller's market, it's very easy to sell. Both has its advantages and disadvantages, as well as we've already discussed as well. So we've already explained that we're in a buyer's market, and that's due to the fact that finance is a little bit harder to obtain than it was a few years ago. And with that, it results in a lot less action or activity from buyers going out on the market and purchasing properties. Now, it's important to understand the difference between both markets. So let's just quickly recap the both again and really cement this into our brains and understand what a buyer's market is and what a seller's market is. So over to the left, when buying in a buyer's market, it's easier to buy at a low price, and it's evident from the imagery there that the competition is low. There's not 10 people competing with you for that one single property. Therefore, you're able to actually offer a price that you feel fit, and the vendor's more likely to accept it because there's no other buyers looking at buying the property. Now, when it comes time to selling, it equally means it's going to be a little bit trickier, or it takes a little bit longer to sell at a high price. Now, this doesn't mean you can't sell it at a high price. Everything priced correctly will still sell. All I'm saying is that it takes a little bit longer than it would during a seller's market. That's the only big difference here. And the competition is actually high between sellers during a buyer's market because all the sellers are actually competing for the same buyer, and there aren't that many. So what I mean by that is I've actually started to witness at open homes, the agents representing the vendors wanting to sell their properties, there's all sorts of different tactics I'm starting to see, like, free sausage sizzles, free lunch or coffee, at the open home, stuff like that you wouldn't normally see at a seller's market because there's so much demand and so many buyers ready to buy. And that's the big difference. So let's look at over on the right-hand side, the seller's market. When it comes to buying time, it's very hard to buy at a low price, and it's evident by the imagery there that there's 10 other people looking at that same property ready to put an offer on because everyone's actually got finance available from the bank as well. So the competition is extremely high, it's extremely fierce, and it's incredibly hard to buy a property at a good low price that you can trade and flip and make profits on. However, on the selling side, it's actually quite easy to sell at a high price because there's so many buyers ready and waiting to line up for your property and prepared to buy it from you, even at a price higher than you've just purchased it for. And that's the key difference there. So the competition is actually very low between the sellers because the sellers aren't competing for the buyers. They don't have to throw any lunch givings or coffees or sausage sizzles or anything like that because there's so many buyers and they're all finance approved and they're ready to buy it. Now, that's the two difference in the current market, and as I mentioned, we're currently in a buyer's market because finance is a little bit harder to obtain, which means the activity when buying property has slowed down, and that's what distinguishes us being in a buyer's market. Now, there's actually advantages and disadvantages in both markets. With the buyer's market, it's a lot easier to pick up a deal and a little bit harder to sell. In a seller's market, it's a lot harder to pick up a deal, but it's a lot easier to sell. So those are the two key differences. And I play in both markets, the buyer's market or seller's market, and either market doesn't actually affect my business at all. And if you can actually understand these two markets and know where we're heading or where we're currently at, then you can actually play it to your advantage as well. So don't think that because it's a buyer's market, yes, it's easier to pick up a deal, but no one's going to buy it. No, that's not the case. All it means is it takes a little bit longer to sell because the frequency of buyers are not as high. It may be the case that in a seller's market, it takes 10 people walking through the property before you find one serious buyer. And in a buyer's market, it may be the case of the exact same scenario. It takes 10 people to walk through before someone buys. However, in a seller's market, it may take only 2 to 3 weeks to find all these 10 different people walking through before you actually sell the property. Now in a buyer's market, when you're selling, because the frequency of people is not as high every week on the open home, it might be 2 months before you actually find 10 people walking through the home before you finally get that offer in hand and sell the property. So that's the only big difference here, is it takes a little bit longer versus a seller's market where it's a little bit quicker to sell. Both markets are awesome to work in if you understand it. So that's the big thing, is understanding the markets and applying it to your advantage as well. So now guys, we've established the main differences between a buyer's market and a seller's market and how this actually affects us. Now, it's important to understand that these are the rules that apply to us when we're buying on the open market. So this means when we're buying through real estate agents and we're going to auction or negotiation and stuff like that. Now, what I want to talk about is how does this actually affect us if we're buying privately? And the answer to that is it doesn't actually affect us at all, because when we're buying privately, it doesn't matter if it's a seller's market or a buyer's market. We're solving the problems of the vendors, and it's not really dependent on what the market conditions are. So as we explained previously, on a seller's market, it's a lot more difficult to find a deal. Well, guess what? If you're actually buying privately, if you know how to connect to these vendors or be in front of these vendors, there's always going to be people that are wanting to sell anyway. And because they're selling privately, you don't actually have to deal with the competition as you would during a seller's market, where there's a lot of buyers that are finance approved and competing against the property you're wanting to buy. Same idea in a buyer's market. Although it's a lot easier to pick up a deal on the open market, you're still out there buying deals privately, and when you're buying deals privately, it doesn't really matter what the market conditions are. You're still going to be able to buy because you're solving the problems directly of the vendor itself. So you can see on the slide here that basically the only thing that the market will determine is whether your private property that you've just put under contract will determine how quickly it would actually sell. So that's the main difference of the buyers and sellers market. And if you're buying privately or not, just keep in mind that it takes a little bit longer to sell in today's market. However, you're still able to go out there and buy these deals privately and get them for a wicked price, because ultimately you're solving the problems of the vendors, and that doesn't actually relate or correlate with the actual market conditions. So that's something very important to keep in mind, guys. And on the slide here, you can see the image here that we've got buy low, sell high, and it's a pretty basic strategy. It's basic principles of capitalism essentially. Anything that you're buying has gotten margin on top of it. That's how the business is actually making money. And it's the same idea with our business. What we want to do is buy low and sell high. And because we're, at times when we're buying privately or if we're buying on the open market, it doesn't matter. As long as we buy well below the current market price, wherever that market price sits, means we're getting a good purchase price, and we can easily sell it back on the open market for whatever the market price is. And obviously, whatever the market price is would depend on where the market is. So again, it doesn't really matter what market we're playing in, as long as we keep to the main principles of buying low and selling high. And essentially, it all comes down to actually buying well. I know other property traders, very, very much dwell over how much renovations they've put into the property and how much value they've added, or how beautiful it looks after the renovations. And that's all good and well, because it might make you emotionally feel good. But ultimately, if you're not going to make any money, well, it's just a waste of time. So ultimately, what it comes down to is the money is made when you buy. And when you buy well, you're never actually going to lose money on the other end. Obviously, if you follow the rules that I've been discussing, and we'll be going over some of the strategies on how to de-risk a deal, you're definitely not going to be losing any money, and you're only going to move forward on deals that are going to guarantee you a profit on the other end. So keep that in mind. It all comes down to buying well. Not about the renovations, not about how much money you put in or how much time or an eye for detail or anything like that, but it all comes down to buying well. And I really want to emphasize that, so you guys remember that moving forward as well. So guys, just to show you a diagram of what I mean by buying well is having a look here. You can see on the left hand side is the price column. Right, so it's very straightforward stuff. So the market price is the red line that you can see, and your purchase price is the green line. So what we're doing here is we're basically buying at the green line and selling it back onto the open market on the red line. And that in between spread is what we call our margin, our profit margin. And again, it doesn't matter what market we're in, because if we're in a buyer's or seller's market, what will change is the actual market price. That red line will either shift up or shift down. Whatever the case, we're making sure that the purchase price is always going to be below that red line, wherever that red line is going to sit. Whether it's a lot higher, whether it's a lot lower, it doesn't actually matter. So again, keep in mind the main strategy or the main key focus here is to buy well. The money is made when you first buy. And if you don't buy well, no matter what renovations you're going to do, that's not going to change the outcome of what you're going to profit at the end of the day. So, really cement that into your brain that ultimately the money is made when you buy, and you have to buy well at the very start. Otherwise, it's going to be a big hassle at the end, and you're not actually going to realize your profits and realize how much time you've actually wasted. So what I'm going to show you guys next is just a few examples of deals that I've done in a buyer's market and a seller's market, just so you can kind of see the difference. And I'll also show you a few private deals that I've done during a seller's and buyer's market, just to show you that when you're doing private deals, it doesn't actually matter what market you're playing in. So let's just go over some of these examples, and you guys can get a clear idea on how you guys can actually go out and do this yourself. So the first example we're going to go over, guys, is a property deal that I traded in a seller's market. And if you guys remember, a seller's market is when there's a lot more demand, buyer's demand, and there's not enough stock to go around, or that's how it appears in a seller's market. So this property that we're looking at is a property deal that I traded in Glengarry Road in Glen Eden, and I basically on-sold the property. I didn't actually end up settling the property in my own name. Now, when I went and purchased this property, it was actually done as an open forum through a real estate agent, and it was actually done by an auction. So I ended up competing with I think there was 2 or 3 other bidders at the time, and my bid ended up winning the property purchase, and I paid a total of $516,000 for the property, or that's how much the bidding went up to. Now, from the day of winning the auction, it was about a 30-day gap before the actual settlement. However, on auction, I had to actually pay a small deposit. I think it was anywhere ranging from 5 to 10%. I can't quite remember, but it was 5 to 10% of $516,000 as the purchase price. Now, how I actually structured the deal was I actually got early access from the vendor to look through the property and start planning my renovations. And I actually had intentions to go and settle the deal and do it up and put it back on the market. Now, instead, what I actually did was, during the time before settlement, because there was a 30-day gap, when I won the auction, I actually started to bring a few buyers through as well as my tradies, to get a better gauge of the renovation cost. And it turns out that I actually found another buyer that was an investor that wanted to buy and hold the property and rent it out to tenants that he had tenants lined up for. So he actually offered me $552,000 for the property, when I only had purchased it a week ago for $516,000. So I was making $36,000 as a gross profit in a span about a week's time. Now, keep in mind, the deal wasn't fully finished up or closed until settlement, but he did end up settling the property, and I did make my $36,000 gross profit, and it was a pretty smooth and easy to structure deal. Now, at the time when I purchased the property for $516,000, the reason why I was prepared to put that offer or put that bid at auction was because my research had indicated the property valuation should have been closer to $570,000, and my power team, which we'll cover in week 2, had confirmed this valuation for me as well. All my research and all the feedback indicated that this is what the property would have been worth, or should have been worth, or that's what it should be selling for. So I was confident when I was buying it at $516 that I wasn't going to lose any money, and it was only going to be the case of, am I going to make $10,000, or is it going to be the case that I make $50,000? It wasn't ever the case of am I going to make money or not. I definitely knew I was going to make money. Now, the beautiful thing about doing an on-sale is I didn't actually spend $1 on the actual renovation cost. Keep in mind that I just took the property, I brought some tradies in to get an idea of some quotes for the actual renovation works, but I actually had sold it to another buyer before actually settling the property, and I didn't actually start to spend any money on the renovations at all. So it wasn't very time consuming. I think I went out to the property about 2 to 3 times max, just showing a couple of tradies around and showing a couple of buyers. But after that, after those few viewings, I actually got a sales and purchase agreement on offer with the investor wanting to buy it off me for $552,000. So even if I hadn't had sold it for that amount, I knew that the instant equity I was making was about $54,000. That what we call the equity is the difference between what the property is worth compared to what you have actually purchased it for. So if we go 570,000 less 516,000, that gives us an instant equity of 54,000. Now, equity isn't real cash. It's not something you can just go to the bank and use or anything like that, or you can't, do your shopping with it. But it shows us where we should be at if the property had actually sold at 570. And because it didn't sell at 570 and it sold at 552, that's why I didn't have 54,000 in the hand, and instead I had 36,000 in the hand. Still a very good earn for going out to the property only a couple of times, and I probably spent a total of less than 10 hours on that property to make a gross profit return of 36,000. And I was quite confident buying the property because when I bought the property at 516,000, it was actually 9.5% below the valuation of what the property was worth. So in my mind, I was quite confident, and there was no doubt that I was going to be making money on that deal. So that's a seller's market. We were actually competing against other buyers, and it was very easy to sell. I was able to quickly on-sell it to another buyer that was able to pay me more than what I had purchased it for. So that's the idea of a seller's market. It's a little bit more difficult to pick up a deal, and it was in this case because I was actually competing with 2 to 3 other bidders. But equally, for me to sell the property, it was very quick and easy. It didn't take a lot of effort for me to find another buyer, and that buyer obviously saw the value buying it at 552 because he was also making instant equity of about $18,000 as well. So he was also very happy. So guys, that's just an example of a deal on an open forum through a real estate agent, and a deal that I've done in a seller's market. So it gives you a good idea. So the next deal we're going to be looking at is a deal that I've done in Disraeli Street in Epsom, and it's a deal that's actually been featured on the media. So if you Google this deal, you will find it, you will see it. And essentially this deal was done in a buyer's market. So the main difference again, guys, is a buyer's market has less bidders or less competition of buyers, and it's a little bit more difficult for the vendors to offload the property because there's not as many people that have obtained finance and that are ready to actually go out and start bidding or buying properties. So this one here was bought through a real estate agent, and I actually bought it via an open forum through auction, and I ended up purchasing the property or winning the auction bid at $1,255,000. Now I know that seems like an exorbitant amount, and you guys are thinking, I could never do something like this, but keep in mind I didn't put a lot of money into this deal at all, and I'll kind of go over all these numbers with you. So when I actually won the auction at $1,255,000, I was confident winning the auction, and I wasn't scared at all because I knew that every research and every bit of information and feedback I was getting back indicated the value of the property should have sat somewhere closer to $1.6 million or $1,660,000. That's the valuation, that's the feedback and the information I was getting. So when I won the property at $1,255,000, it didn't scare me at all because I knew that there was such a big gap and spread that I knew I was definitely going to make money. The only question was how much money was I going to make on this deal. So I had intentions of actually settling the property using JV money partners and other methods, which we'll cover in this ongoing weeks. And again, I had early access. I brought a few tradies in and started to get an idea of what I wanted to do to the place before the actual settlement of the property. And at the time when I was actually bringing a few people through and whatnot, an agent actually reached out to me and said, well, I've actually got a buyer that's interested in looking at buying something in this area. And, she connected the buyer to the property, and he actually instantly made an offer $95,000 above what I actually had paid for it. So $1,255,000 was what I paid, and the buyer actually put in 1,350,000. So he offered $1,350,000. So that was $95,000 up from what I initially had purchased it for. And this was only a week later, and we're still, 3-4 weeks out from the actual settlement date. But he actually offered me this price, this offer, and it was an unconditional offer. So he didn't actually have any conditions or anything like that. So to me, I had the option of either going, well, I could actually end up settling the deal and, I have to split profits with my money partners, or, I might have to go out and obtain finance from somewhere and pay some finance fees and whatnot and go through, loopholes. Or I could take the bird in the hand. I haven't actually done anything to the property. The total amount of time I've spent working on this deal was probably me checking the property out, going to the auction, winning the auction, and then bringing a couple of tradies through. I think, in terms of hours spent on this property, it would definitely be less than 10 hours. And, for me, I was thinking, well, I haven't spent that much time or effort. It's been less than 10 hours work. And for me to make a $95,000 gross profit on it is a pretty good earn. So I actually decided to say, you know what, I'll take the bird in hand. I'll run with the 95,000 and I'll go work on the next deal. That's what I'm good at. I'm good at finding these deals and realizing where the values are different, and my time is better off looking for the next deal rather than going out and settling the deal and doing the renovations and having to split the profits with my money partner, only to probably receive 95,000 anyway. The only difference is it would have taken a lot longer for me to get that result. So I ended up taking that profit, and I was very confident from the very beginning because I knew that my purchase price compared to the valuation, the instant equity spread was about 405,000. And I know that seems insane to see on the numbers, but it really was, what instilled the confidence in me to actually say, yes, I'll put my hand up for $1,255,000. And, it ended up being a pretty good deal. I bought it 24% below valuation and earning 95,000 gross profit, in a span of, just over a week's time. Keep in mind the deal hadn't settled yet, but we pretty much firmed everything up and closed everything up. And about a week's time was a pretty good week that week. It was a pretty good profit earning. So that's, again, the main difference with a buyer's market versus a seller's market. I didn't actually have to compete with anyone. I was the only one at auction. It just so happened that the real estate agent reached out to me and said that she had another buyer wanting to buy in that area. I imagine if I had tried to sell it on the open market, maybe it would have taken a little bit longer. But it just shows that because the deal was priced right, even for the next buyer, he was prepared to go buy it straight away, unconditionally, because he was also getting it massively undervalued for what it was compared to the valuation. Keep in mind, he paid $1,350,000, but the valuation still sat at $1,660,000. So you can see that he was still making about a 300K equity spread. So he was very happy. And for me, I took the 95,000. Maybe I could have made more, maybe not. I don't actually know because I didn't end up pursuing that route. But I was happy with making 95, and if he made 300 odd thousand, and that makes him happy, that's fine as well. You got to leave a little bit of fat for the next person as well. That's what we call sharing the love, right? So that's the big difference. I had no competition, and doesn't matter if it's a buyer's market or seller's market, properties will still sell. If they're priced correctly, they'll still sell. And in this instance, because it was still priced 300 odd K below what his purchase price was, he was more than happy to pay it. He was more than happy to pay me 1.35 million, and he actually knew that I had purchased it a week ago for 1.255 million. But that wasn't an issue because what works for me, and what works for the end purchaser works for them. Everyone's got different criteria, and the perception of price would be different for each individual as well. So the next example I want to show you guys is a private deal that we've done in a seller's market. And you'll remember a seller's market is where it benefits the sellers more than it does for the buyers, and it means that the buyers are all ready to go, there's a huge demand for it, and the seller can pretty much dictate the prices they want. Now, this case study is a little bit different to the ones we've looked at in the past because you can see that I've actually put down it was renovated and on-sold. So you're probably wondering, well, how can you actually renovate something that you don't actually own? Well, we've actually structured the deal, which we'll go over in the upcoming weeks, and how we've been able to do this, but we were able to actually negotiate with the vendor, and she actually allowed us to renovate the property before handing over money to actually own the property. It happens very often for the deals that we've done, and I'll be teaching you guys on the upcoming lessons on exactly how you can position yourself to do this. So you don't have to have the worry of bearing the finance costs and stuff like that and worry about where the money's coming from, all whilst you can still add value to the property as well. And the reason why I'm showing you all these different case studies of deals done in a buyer's market and a seller's market, both through real estate agents on the open forum, as well as doing it privately, is just to show you guys that regardless of what market we're playing in, as long as you follow the strategies I've been teaching you guys, you're still going to be able to make these life-changing profits, and huge profits at that. So this deal that we've done in a seller's market was done in Willis Road and Papakura, and we renovated it, and we also on-sold the property as well. Now, the problem with this deal here was the vendor had actually already tried to put it on the open market, and you're probably thinking, well, if it's a seller's market, she should have easily sold it. Well, the problem was that she was actually constrained with time and needed a quick settlement, which maybe put a lot of people off. What I also realized was when I walked into the property, I could kind of spot a few things that would make the buyers walk away from the property. And one of those things was the place was incredibly dark because of the lighting or the window film that she had on the window screens. The second thing was the paint colors internally on all the walls were all mix and match and all different, and actually made the place very dark. I think the majority of the rooms were actually a dark blue gray color. And given that the films on the actual windows that she had prevented more light coming in, as well as having the grey-blue interior paint, that just dimmed the whole place down, and it made it feel very gloomy and dark, and definitely not a place that you want to raise your family in or even live in as a tenant. And on top of that, you know, her big concern was that she had just bought another property, and she had, you know, mortgages on both properties, and she was getting financially strained. So, you know, she had a lot of different conditions for the buyers. You know, she wanted a quick settlement, which maybe buyers didn't feel comfortable with, and equally the property being very dim and very gloomy, you know, made other people not comfortable putting forward an offer. So when she had put it on the open market and didn't sell, she had to look at a different option, and she actually had my business card when I met with her, and I was quite surprised because I didn't actually meet this vendor in the past before, and she had told me that I had purchased a property from one of her friends or a friend of a friend or something, and her friend had actually kept my business card. And when she contacted me, I walked in the property and I could instantly spot what I could do to revamp the place to actually sell it. And we ended up negotiating, and I ended up buying the property at $624,000. And of course, this was done privately, so there's, you know, no commissions or anything like that, and that's the number that she was going to get in her hand. And what my research and my power team had indicated was that if I had spent, you know, $4,500 on just brightening the place, removing the film off the windows, and adding a fresh coat of white paint on the interior, that would actually make the property be worth closer to the vicinity of the mid $700,000 figures. So we had actually got a registered valuation after we renovated the place and put a lick of paint on and fixed up the windows, and the registered valuation came back at $760,000. So you can see spending a little bit of money had boosted the valuation price, and I knew that when I had purchased the property at $624,000, knowingly that the valuation was going to come in somewhere in the mid sevens after I had spent a bit of money, less than $5,000, that my purchase price was essentially 18% below the valuation. And I knew that the instant equity would be somewhere in the vicinity of $100,000 plus. In this case, it's $136,000. It's the difference between the registered valuation and the actual purchase price. Now, at the time, I didn't have a money partner in place for this particular deal, and the reason why was my money partners were tied up in other deals that I'd been working on. Equally, I didn't try to go out and get finance myself, so what I tried to do instead was just on-sell the property. And there was another investor friend of mine that I'd put him on my database, and when I took on this property and after I renovated it, I actually drew up a small little email with all the benefits of this property and why it was a good investment and why people should be buying it, whether they want to buy it off me and resell it, or whether they want to buy it and hold it for a rental, completely up to them. But I wrote my little piece on the email and I sent it off to my database, which I'll teach you guys in the upcoming sessions as well. And one of the investors actually responded and said, well, you know, I'll take the property on. So at the time I was quite constrained. I, you know, could have if I, got my shit together basically and got finance in place, I would have possibly made a little bit more. But at the time, I didn't worry too much, and I said, you know what, it's better taking the bird in the hand. And again, I'm better at finding deals and working on the next one rather than trying to maximize every single deal and trying to collect every dollar off the table. So I ended up selling this one for $660,000. It was a private sale. There's no commissions or anything like that involved. And from the date of the purchase to the completed renovations, that took about a week and a half. And from a week and a half later, it took me another good 5 days to bring the buyer through, and it took a little bit of time, and he was umming and ahhing whether he should pay me $660 or he was trying to drill me down for a cheaper price as well. But I said, look, here's the registered valuation. It's at $760,000. You're gaining $100,000 in equity. I can't drop the price any further for you. And I stood firm, and the buyer obviously saw the value in it, and he said, yep, let's roll with $660,000. And in about a 2-week period, I was able to make $31,500 gross profit, and it was a very smooth transition deal. The vendor was happy because she's no longer financially strained on paying mortgages for 2 properties and not being able to find a seller. Equally, I was happy making $31,500 in a span of about 2 to 3 weeks time. And also the buyer was happy because he was buying a property that was well below the actual valuation of the property, and he was making about $100,000 in equity. And you can see that regardless in a seller's market or a buyer's market, when we're buying privately, it doesn't really make the biggest difference, right? So another awesome deal, and I'll show you one more case study as well, guys. So the next deal I'm going to go over with you guys is a private deal that I purchased in a buyer's market. So again, just to reiterate, a buyer's market is when it's more beneficial for the buyer and less for the vendor, meaning that the vendor doesn't have as many options for buyers because there's only a limited amount of buyers available that have finance and are willing to buy the property. So this one here, the vendor actually approached me through an online medium. I think it must have been through Facebook or some website advertising that I was doing at the time. And he had other business interests that he wanted to pursue, and it was actually time sensitive for him. Now, I don't know the exact details of why he needed the money so quick, but it could have been a business deal that may or may not have been available if he didn't act quickly on it. Now, this vendor actually had a registered valuation before approaching me, and the valuation actually sat at $460,000. And the valuation was not too long ago. I think it was within a 6 months period, of which rules have slowly started to change, and it started becoming more of a buyer's market than a seller's market. So he obviously knew about this, and he knew about the shift in the market. So I heavily negotiated the price down to $386,000. And the leverage there was, if I could settle the property within 30 days, would you be able to work with this pricing? And, because he needed the money fairly quickly, he knew that the option of selling to someone privately like myself was going to be a lot better and more beneficial for him, because it meant that he wouldn't have to miss out on this other business venture deal that he was looking at. And had he put it on the open market, there would have been a chance that he may have got a little bit more than the 386, or possibly a little bit less. We don't really know, because that's the route he never went down. But typically speaking, the traditional route when he's putting it on the market could take anywhere between 2 to 3 to even 4 months before he actually realizes the money. At which point maybe his business deal that he was looking at, or the business venture, would be long gone. So I actually ended up negotiating this one for $386,000, with the registered valuation being at $460,000. Now, the place needed renovations, and basically, again, same like the other case studies that I've shown you guys, I actually got early access before settlement, and I started renovating the property even before I paid him all the money for the property. And the improvement cost, the actual renovation that we had done on the property, it was quite extensive, because he had it as a rental for a very long period, and the tenants didn't really take care of the place. So we actually replaced the bathroom and the kitchen, and painted everything, and put new carpet down and new vinyl and stuff like that. And it ended up costing us a total of $17,000. Now, the good thing was that our sales price, when we actually put it on the market, we actually fetched $503,000. So the gross profit there was $100,000, and the instant equity that we're talking about is $74,000 off the bat, just based on the registered valuation, even before we spent any money on it at all. And again, that was purchased below the valuation, being 16% below. So already I knew I was onto a winner. And this one was quite easy because the vendor had actually done all the work for me. He had actually presented me with a registered valuation that cemented the price to be worth 460, and I knew that it was going to be worth more had the property been renovated. So spending, kind of 17,000 from the original registered valuation of 460 ended up allowing us to sell the property for 503,000. So spending just 17,000 actually got us an extra 20 odd thousand on the other end. So I thought that was a massive improvement, and if we had not done the renovations, I'm almost certain that we would get nowhere near the 503,000 sales price, and it would have probably sat closer to even maybe 450 or even a little bit less, because we are, keep in mind, in a buyer's market, and there's not as many buyers as there are in a seller's market. So again, an awesome deal. This one took a little bit longer than some of the deals I've talked about previously, and I think this one took a total turnaround time of maybe about we had early access to do the renovations, and we completed that within a 2 to 3 week period, and then from there we actually sold the property and received the funds a month after that. So it was close to about a 2-month deal, but again, an awesome deal where we closed close to about $100,000 gross profit within a 2-month period as well. And again, happy vendor, because he got the money very quickly to do other business ventures that he was pursuing. We're really happy because we made an awesome profit on this deal, even in a buyer's market or a seller's market, doesn't matter. Private deals were making us good money, and also the end purchaser had bought a property at a good and reasonable price at market level, and whether they're living in it or renting it, it's also going to be a good investment long term. So everyone's happy, and we made a fantastic deal on this private deal brought in a buyer's market. So I just want to go over something with you guys as well, just kind of the basic rule of thumbs on what to look out for in the property market. And as a rule of thumb, I think property trading is doable in any city, any market, but I would prefer if people would work in cities that had at least a population of 100,000 people or more. Also, the other thing to look out for is places that have a high transaction volume mean that it's a good place to start trading in, because it means you can easily buy something and sell it on the other end. Now, if you're buying something where, take for example, a city that only has 50,000 people and there's not a lot of trading action or properties being sold and bought, well, that kind of indicates to me that it might be quite a quiet town, and it's probably something more for retired people to go to, and there's not going to be a lot of action happening. Not to say you can't do it and make money, but I think there's a lot better success if you're working in a city or a town that has 100,000 people or more population-wise, or has a high volume of transactions in terms of property sales. And to find that information out, you can just go online and figure out where your city is, and it might even pay, because given how life-changing these profits are, it might even pay to actually move into a city or a town that has a higher population, so you can start trading and making these profits. Also, to find out whether a city has high transaction volumes, it's pretty straightforward. You'd connect with your local real estate agent and find out how many properties on average does the city sell per year or per month, and kind of work backwards to figure out if you're working in a city that's worthwhile for you to actually make life-changing profits. You don't want to be stuck in a place that trading in a place where you buy something and you think you're onto a good price, and it might be the case that you've bought really well, but if you can't actually sell it on the other end, then you become stuck, and that's definitely something you don't want to do. So again, we're going to be covering more in-depth details about how to ensure that you never get stuck, and ensure that you definitely can offload the deal before you actually take it on, to de-risk the deal and ensure that you won't be losing money. Because the aim of the game is to ensure that you make money on every deal. We're not a charity, we're not working for free, and ultimately if we can earn a healthy profit and enrich our own lives and help other people, then we've done our job by helping the vendor, helping ourselves, and also helping the end buyer as well. So there you have it, everyone. We've just completed the first week out of the 6, and there's been a ton of information that we've gone over, and it's been action-packed. And guys, if you are getting confused about anything, if I'm going over things a bit too fast, or if you don't understand anything, make sure you replay that section or rewatch the entire video to ensure that you understand everything in this week 1 section before moving on to week 2. The reason being is, if you decide to move forward onto week 2, week 3, and etc., it's only going to appear more confusing because we move on to more advanced topics as well. So without understanding the fundamentals, you're not going to be able to do the rest of the week. So I highly encourage you to go back, take the notes in your own word, and really review everything to ensure that you understand it like second nature before moving to the next week. And also what we'll cover, guys, is each week I'm actually going to lay out actionable steps for you guys. It's either going to be in a form of homework or work that you have to do yourself, or finishing up a quiz to really test your knowledge to ensure that you understand everything of each week before moving forward onto the next week's session. And this week's actionable steps for this week, I want you guys to obtain 5 certificates of titles. And it's really easy to do because you can go out and ask a lawyer for it, or you can go out and request the title from the real estate agent listing the property. And I want you guys to actually fill out 5 sales and purchase contracts using the 9th edition 2012 version of the S&P that I've actually provided in the downloadable sections for week 1. And also I want you guys to fill out 5 contracts using the real estate agent's version of the S&P contract as well. And you know, this can be the case of you going out to open homes and just writing in offers just so you get the hang of things. So that's what I want you guys to do. Again, I want you guys to obtain 5 certificates of titles, and you can do that by requesting a lawyer to help you out, or going to a real estate agent and requesting this information for the particular property being listed that you're looking at. And I want you guys to fill out 5 sales and purchase contracts using the 9th edition provided in this week's downloadables, as well as 5 contracts using the real estate version of the S&P as well. And you know, I want you guys to really understand and get into the notion of filling these things out so it doesn't become scary when you actually need to go out and put in a real offer on a property that's actually going to make you money. So get comfortable with this. It's going to take you a little while, but the more you do it, the more practice, you know, practice does make perfect, and then it will start to become like second nature. So once you've done that and completed that task, the actionable steps, only then, once you understand everything in week 1 and completed the actionable steps, only then do you move to week 2. And we've got a ton of information to cover in week 2, so I'm really excited. So I look forward to seeing you guys on week 2's session. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me on week 1, and onwards and upwards to next week as well. See you guys soon. Bye-bye. Thank you everyone for reaching the end of week 1 out of 6 modules for the Property Academy program. In this week's modules, we've covered understanding different property types and the property market. Now, in every week, I'm going to be providing you guys with some actionable steps to take to help you memorize this the week's lesson and really go out and apply it and take the skills that you've learned so you can actually apply it in the real world. So this week's actionable steps, I want you guys to actually go out and obtain 10 certificate titles. And I want you guys to actually fill out 10 sales and purchase agreement just to get used to it. You don't have to actually present the agreement to anyone, or you don't have to actually put an offer out to an actual vendor. All I want you guys to do is get used to putting pen to paper and filling out a S&P so it makes sense and you understand it. So again, the actionable steps for this week is to obtain 10 certificate titles and fill out 10 sales and purchase agreements for an S&P, so you get used to it and you can get used to the feeling of putting pen to paper, writing out an actual live contract. Now, I don't want you guys to be moving forward into week 2's lesson until you've completed the actionable steps for every week, because this will help you understand the next lesson a lot more clearly so you don't actually miss out the important information. So thank you again everyone for completing week 1 out of the 6 modules for the Property Academy program, and I'll see you guys on week 2. Thank you. Bye bye.